In this video, we will explore the cases of the oldest prisoners ever executed in the United States, men who spent decades on death row before finally facing their fate. From their crimes to their final words and last meal, we will uncover the full story behind their executions. James Barney Hubbard. In 1957, James Barney Hubbard was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of David Dockery in Tuscaloosa County. After spending 19 years in prison, he was released in 1976. A year later, he committed another crime. His second victim, Lillian Montgomery, was a 62-year-old store owner who had befriended Hubbard and supported him during his release. After his release from prison, Hubbard moved into her home, located next to the store she ran in Tuscaloosa. On January 10, 1977, Montgomery was found lifeless with 3 gunshot wounds, one in the face, one in the head, and one in the shoulder. Her gold and diamond watch, along with approximately $500 in cash and checks, were stolen. Hubbard claimed they had been drinking whiskey together and said Montgomery had taken her own life, even calling the police to report the incident. However, the evidence revealed it was a homicide. He was arrested shortly afterward and sentenced to death in 1977. He spent almost 3 decades on death row while presenting appeals, arguing that his advanced age and mental deterioration made his execution cruel and unusual punishment. However, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeal in a 5-4 vote, and Alabama Governor Bob Riley denied his clemency request. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Hubbard requested 2 medium-boiled eggs. For slices of bacon, sliced tomatoes, fried green tomatoes, pineapple slices with mayonnaise, white bread, a banana, and a medium-sized V8 juice. On August 5, 2004, James Barney Hubbard was executed by lethal injection at Holman Prison near Atmore, Alabama. During the execution, his daughter, Barbara McKinn, watched from an adjacent room while he maintained eye contact with her until he passed away. Jimmy Montgomery, the victim's son, also witnessed the execution and expressed his dissatisfaction because Hubbard did not say any last words or show any remorse. Hubbard was declared dead at 6:36 p.m., becoming the oldest inmate executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Cecil Clayton. In 1996, Cecil Clayton ended the life of Sheriff's Deputy Chris Castetter in Missouri. His case attracted attention due to a brain injury he had sustained in 1972 when an accident at a sawmill forced doctors to remove part of his frontal lobe. His lawyers argued that this damage caused a drastic personality change, affecting his judgment and making him mentally incompetent for the death penalty. Despite appeals based on his condition, the courts determined that Clayton understood his execution, making him eligible for capital punishment. The Supreme Court rejected his request for a stay, and Governor Jay Nixon denied clemency. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Clayton requested steak, salad, mashed potatoes with gravy, bread, apple pie, and a glass of milk. On March 17, 2015, Cecil Clayton was executed by lethal injection at the Missouri State Penitentiary. He was declared dead at 9:21 p.m. When asked for his last words, Clayton said, "No, they brought me here to execute me." John Albert Bolts. On April 18, 1984, John Bolts ended the life of his 23-year-old stepson, Doug Kirby, in Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. That night, after drinking, Bolts broke into his mother-in-law's house and had an argument with his wife. After she threatened to call the police, he left. Later, he called Doug, and after a brief conversation, the young man headed to his stepfather's trailer home. Soon after, Bolts called his wife and said, "I'm going to cut your dear boy's head off." Alarmed, she contacted the police. A neighbor testified that she saw Doug lying on the floor while Bolts was hitting him and shouting obscenities. He then stabbed him with a shiny object. Bolts claimed self-defense, stating that Doug tried to grab a weapon when he arrived at the house. However, a revolver was found in the victim's car with no traces of blood, despite the seat being covered in it. On November 21, 1984, John Bolts was sentenced to death and spent over 21 years on death row. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Bolts requested fried chicken, potato wedges, baked beans, coleslaw, an apple pie, and a roll. On June 1, 2006, John Albert Bolts was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was declared dead at 7:22 p.m. When asked about his last words, he said, "This is a moment of joy for me and a moment of sadness. It's a moment of joy because I know I'm going to a better place. It's a moment of sadness because I think about all the people involved who brought me here and what awaits them. It's been many years of pain, and now it all comes down to this." He also mentioned passages from the Old Testament, urging those present to read the book of Deuteronomy. Brandon Astor Jones. On June 17, 1979, Roger Tackett was working as a manager at a Tenneco convenience store when he was attacked during a robbery. Brandon Astor Jones and Van Roosevelt Solomon entered the store with the intention of robbing it, which resulted in Tackett losing his life. Jones was arrested and, on October 17, 1979, was sentenced to death along with Solomon, who was executed in 1985 by electric chair at the age of 41. In 1989, a federal court ordered that Jones be resentenced after discovering that jurors had brought a Bible into the deliberation room. In 1997, he was once again sentenced to death. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Jones did not make a specific request, so he was served the standard institutional tray, which included chicken and rice, collard greens, seasoned turnip greens, and cornbread. On February 3, 2016, Jones was executed by lethal injection in Georgia. Officials struggled for 45 minutes to insert the four, initially attempting his left arm, then his right arm, and finally his groin, where a doctor successfully established the connection. He was declared dead at 12:46 a.m. When asked about his last words, Jones made no public statement. He accepted a final prayer and recorded a message for his family. According to the Georgia Department of Corrections, this was the first execution in Georgia in 2016 and the fifth in the United States that year. Murray Hooper. On December 31, 1980, Murray Hooper and two other men broke into the home of William Pat Redmond in Phoenix, Arizona. Inside, they bound and gagged Redmond, his wife Marilyn, and her mother, Helen Phelps. They then shot them in the head. Marilyn survived the attack and testified against Hooper during the trial. Authorities stated that the murders were ordered by a man who wanted to take control of Redmond's printing business. Hooper was sentenced to death and spent more than 4 decades on death row. Over the years, his attorneys unsuccessfully attempted to have DNA and fingerprint tests performed on the evidence in the case. They also argued that Marilyn Redmond's identification of Hooper had changed over time, and that some witnesses had received benefits in other criminal cases in exchange for testifying against him. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Hooper requested Kentucky Fried Chicken, macaroni and cheese, barbecue sauce, a biscuit, cheesecake, 2 pints of Neapolitan ice cream, and a large Fanta soda. On November 16, 2022, Murray Hooper was executed by lethal injection at the Florence State Prison in Arizona. During the procedure, there were difficulties inserting the intravenous lines, which delayed the execution. Eventually, the sedative pentobarbital was administered through the femoral artery. Before the execution began, Hooper smiled, waved at the witnesses, and said, "It's all been said. Let it be done." He also addressed his lawyers, friends, and family, saying, "Don't cry for me. Don't be sad." Minutes later, his body stopped moving, and he was declared dead at 10:09 a.m. Thomas Douglas Arthur. In 1977, Thomas Arthur took the life of Eloise Bray West, his wife's sister, after she refused to reveal his whereabouts. He was sentenced to life in prison. While serving his sentence, Arthur participated in a work release program. During this time, he began a relationship with Judy Wicker, who, in 1982, offered him $10,000 to take the life of her husband, Troy Wicker. Arthur accepted the offer and obtained ammunition through an acquaintance. On February 1, 1982, he broke into the Wicker residence disguised with a wig and dark makeup. Troy was shot point-blank in the right eye, causing his immediate death. Judy, in her initial testimony, claimed that an unknown man had attacked her before killing her husband. Authorities discovered inconsistencies in Arthur's alibi and found $2,000 in cash among his belongings. It was determined that Judy had paid him with part of the $90,000 from her husband's life insurance policy. Judy was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, though she later testified against Arthur in exchange for a reduced sentence. Arthur maintained his innocence, but on March 22, 1983, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. His first two convictions were overturned, but the third conviction stood. Arthur faced scheduled executions in 2001, 2007, 2008, 2012, 2015, 2016, and finally in 2017. All were canceled, allowing him to prolong his life on death row. For this reason, he became known as the Houdini of death row, as he managed to elude 7 execution dates before his final one. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Arthur declined the offer, stating, "I don't believe in that last meal nonsense. I never have an appetite when they're trying to kill you. You're not hungry." On May 26, 2017, Thomas Arthur was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama. He was declared dead at 12:15 a.m. When asked for his final words, he said, "I love you," to his daughter and gave a thumbs-up gesture. In an interview before his execution, Arthur spoke about the impact of his repeated execution dates on his family. "It almost killed my oldest daughter, Sherry," he said. "She came to 6 executions, and the stress of her father being killed was so traumatic that it damaged her heart. She almost lost her business and her home, so I told her to disconnect. I didn't want her to come anymore. She didn't come to the 7th one and won't come to this one." Clarence Ray Allen. In 1974, Clarence Ray Allen planned the robbery of France Market, a grocery store in Fresno, California, owned by Ray and Fran Schwitz. Allen, who already had a criminal record, involved his son Roger Allen and other accomplices, including Ed Savala, Carl Mayfield, and Charles Jones. During the robbery, $500 in cash and $10,000 in money orders were stolen. After the robbery, Allen gathered his accomplices to discuss the need to eliminate Mary Sue Kitts, who was related to his son and had been talking too much about the crime. The group unanimously voted for her death, and Allen killed her, an act described as retaliation for the fear that she would talk. Even while incarcerated, Allen continued to orchestrate crimes from prison, conspiring with his cellmate Billy Ray Hamilton to murder key witnesses. In 1980, with the help of his girlfriend, Hamilton committed the murders of Brian Schwitz, Josephine Rosa, and Douglas White, while 2 others were injured. These crimes were orchestrated by Allen, who sought to ensure his exoneration of previous charges. After his arrest, Allen was convicted of the murders and the conspiracy to murder witnesses, receiving the death penalty in 1982. Over the years, Allen appealed his sentence, arguing that his advanced age and physical condition made him unsuitable for execution. However, the court rejected his appeals, and in 2005, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denied his pardon. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Allen requested buffalo meat, fried bread, a bucket of KFC chicken, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free walnut ice cream, and whole milk. On January 17, 2006, Clarence Ray Allen was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison, California. During the execution, an additional dose of lethal potassium was required to stop his heart. Allen was declared dead at 12:38 a.m. Before his death, his final words were, "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you all. I love you all. Goodbye." John B. Nixon Sr. On January 2, 1985, John B. Nixon Sr. was convicted of the contracted killing of 45-year-old Virginia Tucker. Nixon, accompanied by his son John Nixon Jr. and Gilbert Jimenez, broke into the Tucker home. Nixon pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and said, "I've got something for you." Thomas Tucker, who had married Virginia just 6 months earlier, quickly realized that the men had been hired by his wife's ex-husband. Thomas offered money to save their lives, but Nixon responded, "That's not what I'm after. The deal is already done. Nixon shot Thomas, who managed to escape despite being hit twice. Nixon then took his gun and shot Virginia in the head while Jimenez held her down. Nixon and his accomplices fled the scene. Thomas survived and was able to identify Nixon. The man who hired the killers, Lester Joseph Poniu, was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. Nixon's sons, Henry Leon Nixon and John B. Nixon Jr., were convicted on lesser charges related to the plot. Jimenez, who testified against the others, received a 20-year sentence. Nixon was sentenced to death on March 26, 1986, and spent over 19 years on death row. During this time, he attempted to appeal his conviction, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Nixon requested a well-done T-bone steak, buttered asparagus, a baked potato with sour cream, peach pie, vanilla ice cream, and sweet tea. On December 14, 2005, at 6:25 p.m., John B. Nixon Sr. was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Mississippi. He was the first person executed in Mississippi in 2005 and the seventh in the state since 1976. When asked for his final words, he said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for the world. I'm sorry for myself, and I'm sorry for the family. I did not kill Virginia Tucker. I know in my heart, and it pains me to admit it, that it was my son and a Spanish friend and another man from Jackson." John B. Nixon Sr. was pronounced dead at 6:35 p.m. Walter Leroy Moody Jr. On December 16, 1989, federal judge Robert Smith Vance was at his home in Mountain Brook, Alabama, when he opened a package containing a homemade bomb. The explosion instantly ended his life and severely injured his wife, Helen. 2 days later, civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson was killed in a similar explosion at his office in Savannah, Georgia. Authorities launched an extensive investigation that led to the capture of Walter Leroy Moody Jr. and his wife, Susan McBride. On July 13, 1990, McBride was released on bail and testified against Moody in exchange for immunity. Prosecutors determined that Moody had mailed multiple bombs, including one to the 11th Circuit Court headquarters in Atlanta and another to the NAACP office in Jacksonville, Florida, in an attempt to divert attention from his responsibility in Judge Vance's murder. In a federal trial, Moody was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 7 life terms. Later, an Alabama state court sentenced him to death for the murder of Judge Vance, a sentence handed down on February 13, 1997. A day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Moody requested a Philly cheesesteak, a Dr. Pepper, and M&Ms. On April 19, 2018, Moody was executed by lethal injection at Holman Prison in Alabama. He was pronounced dead at 8:42 p.m. When asked for his final words, Moody declined to make a statement. At 83 years and 26 days old, he became the oldest prisoner executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976.